The crowd had gathered in complete silence, the kind you could almost feel pressing against your chest. The sharp echo of boots striking marble steps broke through the morning air as a tomb guard began his precise, unwavering march. His face was unreadable. His movements were flawless. To the tourists, it was a ceremony. To the veterans, it was sacred. But today, it was something more. Just beyond the ropes stood a small boy in a wheelchair, wrapped in a light blue hospital blanket. His skin was pale, his head completely bald. A portable oxygen tank hummed softly at his side. His name was Ethan. And this moment, standing before the tomb of the unknown soldier, was his final wish. His parents stood behind him, hands gripping each other so tightly their knuckles were white. Reporters lingered at a distance, unsure whether to record or simply witness. Even the restless tourists had fallen still. Everyone could sense it. Something extraordinary was about to happen. The guard stopped. His final step landed with an almost thunderous click. He turned sharply, every motion measured, precise, timeless. His eyes locked on Ethan. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to freeze. Ethan raised a trembling hand in a weak salute. And then, something happened that no one expected. The guard, bound by the strictest code of discipline, broke formation. In complete silence, he turned toward the commander of the relief standing nearby. A nod was exchanged. Then, with solemn dignity, the guard stepped off the black mat and slowly approached the boy. The crowd gasped. No one speaks to the guards. No one touches them. But this wasn't a tourist breaking the rules. This was a soldier honoring a soul. The guard stopped right in front of Ethan. He brought his pristine, white-gloved hand to his brow and gave the slowest, most deliberate salute anyone had ever seen. Ethan's eyes widened. His lips quivered. And for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Somewhere behind the crowd, a veteran whispered, "I've never seen that in my life." Reporters lowered their cameras. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. This was more than a ceremony. This was honor meeting innocence. Tradition meeting a dying wish. And what followed in the hours ahead would transform his family's life forever. Long before that unforgettable salute, Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole had stood countless hours on the black mat of Arlington National Cemetery, rain or shine, blistering summer or biting winter. To the crowds, he was a statue in motion, an emblem of discipline and tradition. But behind the flawless steps and steel gaze was a man who carried invisible scars. Daniel had served 2 tours overseas. His best friend, Corporal James Jimmy Halpin, had been his brother in everything but blood. Together they'd shared rations, laughter, and the quiet terror of nights when mortar shells rained down like clockwork. On their last mission, Jimmy had volunteered to take Daniel's patrol shift so he could call home for his daughter's birthday. That night, their convoy was hit. Jimmy never came back. The guilt never left Daniel. When he returned home, medals and ceremonies felt hollow. But standing guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier, honoring those whose names were lost but whose sacrifice echoed through generations, gave him a sense of purpose again. Each step was for Jimmy, each pivot. For the nameless who never made it back, to become a tomb guard meant more than training. It meant perfection. A single misstep, a single lapse in discipline, could dishonor decades of tradition. That's why the guards never break formation. Not for applause, not for tourists, not for anyone. Until Ethan. Hundreds of miles away, in a small-town hospital room, Ethan's parents, Mark and Sarah Wells, sat under the dull glow of fluorescent lights. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the background music of their lives. Ethan had been diagnosed with stage 4 neuroblastoma 2 years earlier. Chemotherapy, surgeries, clinical trials, they had fought every battle with hope. But a few weeks ago, doctors gently delivered the words no parent ever wants to hear: "We're out of options." Ethan was 9 years old. Despite everything, he had a spirit that refused to be crushed. He loved history, especially stories of soldiers. His room was filled with miniature figurines, old war documentaries, and pictures of the tomb guards marching in perfect unison. He'd watch those clips on repeat, whispering, "They never give up." When the Make-A-Wish coordinator visited to ask about his final wish, Ethan didn't hesitate. "I want to meet the guards, the real ones." At their tomb, Mark and Sarah exchanged tearful glances. It wasn't a trip to Disneyland or meeting a celebrity. It was a request rooted in honor, from a child who understood something most adults never do. Within days, calls were made, emails sent. The U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, received the request. Normally, such visits were carefully planned, often limited to meet-and-greet sessions off the ceremonial grounds. But Ethan's case reached the commanding officer, Colonel Peterson, a man known for his no-nonsense exterior. When he read Ethan's letter, scrawled in shaky handwriting, ending with the words, "I want to salute them before I go." He paused longer than usual. "This one's different," he said quietly to his aide, and for the first time in years, special permission was granted. The day of the visit arrived like a quiet storm. The sky over Arlington was crystal blue. Rows upon rows of white marble headstones stretched endlessly, a silent army of heroes standing at attention. Visitors whispered as they walked, their voices softened by the gravity of the place. Ethan's arrival was carefully arranged. A small military transport van brought him and his parents to a discreet entrance. As they exited, soldiers saluted. Ethan tried to salute back, his tiny arm trembling with effort. Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole had been selected to stand post that day. He'd read Ethan's story the night before. It hit him like a gut punch. Jimmy's face flashed in his mind, young, full of life, gone too soon. Something about this boy reminded him of his friend, and of the promise he'd silently made at Jimmy's graveside, "I'll stand for those who can't." Daniel went through his pre-ceremonial checks like clockwork, uniform immaculate, shoes gleaming, rifle inspected 3 times over. But this time, his heartbeat was different. There was weight in the air. He knew the boy would be watching. He knew this might be the last salute Ethan ever saw. As the ceremony began, tourists filled the viewing area. Among them, a few politicians and VIP guests had arrived unannounced, including a local congressman known for his arrogant behavior during public events. His entourage whispered and laughed loudly, drawing disapproving glances from veterans. A cameraman from a major network positioned himself to capture the moment, not knowing this day would soon go viral. Mark knelt beside Ethan's wheelchair. "You ready, champ?" Ethan nodded, eyes fixed on the guard stepping into view. His breathing was shallow, but his focus was laser sharp. He'd watched this ceremony hundreds of times on video, but this time he was living it. Daniel took his first step onto the mat. The heel strike echoed across the plaza. 1 step, to turn, pause, pivot. Every movement was a promise. The crowd fell silent. Even the congressman's chatter faded as the gravity of the moment pulled everyone in. Behind Daniel's stoic expression, his thoughts churned. This isn't just another watch. This is for him, for Jimmy, for the boy. Ethan's fingers curled around the armrest of his chair. His lips parted in awe. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. For one sacred stretch of time, hospital rooms and 4 drips were a distant memory. This was pure reverence. No one there, not Daniel, not the parents, not the camera crews, could have imagined how what was about to unfold would ripple far beyond the cemetery gates. This wasn't just a meeting. It was the collision of honor, innocence, and destiny. The air over Arlington Cemetery felt charged, like the moments before a storm breaks. Ethan sat motionless in his wheelchair, eyes wide as he watched the tomb guard execute each movement with surgical precision. The rhythmic pattern -21 steps, pivot, 21 seconds, pivot again was hypnotic. His mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while his father stood behind him with a hand on his shoulder, silently steadying both their son and himself. A few rows back, Congressman Richard Halbert, a man infamous for his arrogance and need to be the center of attention, shifted impatiently. He was flanked by 2 aides and a pair of local reporters, there to capture his respectful visit for a campaign segment. But respect was the last thing on his mind. 21 steps again. "How long does this go on?" he muttered, loud enough for those near him to hear. One aide nervously hushed him, but he brushed it off with a smirk. "It's a performance. Let's not pretend it's something mystical." Veterans standing nearby stiffened. One older Marine with a weathered face turned slowly toward him, jaw clenched. Another visitor whispered, "Show some respect." But the congressman merely chuckled. As Daniel Cole continued his silent vigil, he caught fragments of the man's voice. He didn't turn his head, he never did, but he heard. The Tomb Guards training drilled one rule above all: ignore distractions, maintain the standard. But this was different. This wasn't tourists making noise. This was a public official undermining sacred ground, and it was happening in front of Ethan, a boy whose final wish was unfolding here. Daniel's jaw tightened imperceptibly as he pivoted. His eyes stayed forward. The rifle against his shoulder gleamed in the sun, his steps measured as ever. Discipline above all. The ceremony moved into its next sequence. The crowd grew even quieter. The click of Daniel's heels against the mat carried like distant gunfire. And then, the congressman stepped forward. At first, it was just 1 step over the visitor boundary. The kind of move most tourists might make by accident before being politely corrected by a security officer. But Richard did it intentionally, hands in his expensive suit pockets, striding forward with the casual arrogance of a man who believed rules didn't apply to him. "Sir, please step back." a uniformed officer quietly instructed. Richard waved him off. Relax, I just want to get a closer look. This is taxpayer-funded, isn't it? Murmurs swept through the crowd. Parents pulled their children closer. The Marine veteran shook his head in disbelief. Ethan's father's expression hardened, but he didn't want to draw attention away from his son's moment. Sarah leaned down and whispered to Ethan, "Just focus on the guard, sweetheart." But Ethan's brow furrowed. Even at 9 years old, he could sense when something sacred was being disrespected. Daniel reached the end of the mat and turned. His gaze, sharp, unwavering, cold as steel, locked on the congressman. He did not speak. He did not break formation, but that single stare carried decades of tradition, discipline, and warning. Richard smirked, pretending to salute sloppily toward Daniel. "Lighten up, soldier. You look like you swallowed a broomstick." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Reporters raised their cameras, sensing the kind of clip that would explode online. Veterans' faces flushed with anger. A young woman muttered, "Unbelievable." But Daniel didn't flinch. His silence spoke louder than any shouted command. He pivoted and continued his march. Unbroken. As the tension grew, Ethan's small voice piped up, hoarse but clear. "Dad, why is he making fun of him?" Mark crouched beside him. "Some people don't understand respect, but look at the guard. See how he doesn't react. That's strength." Ethan nodded slowly, his little hand gripping the wheelchair armrest. His eyes followed Daniel like a student watching his hero face a test. The congressman wasn't finished. Emboldened by the crowd's discomfort and the cameras pointed his way, he began mocking the precision. "1, 2, 3, turn," he said in a sing-song tone, mimicking the guard's movements with exaggerated gestures. His aides looked mortified. One tried to tug at his sleeve. "Sir, please." Richard laughed. "What? It's theater. Everyone's taking this too seriously." Veterans began stepping forward, but officers held up their hands, urging restraint. This was Arlington, not a rally. Emotions ran hot, but rules were rules. The contrast was striking. On one side, a dying child, eyes filled with reverence, watching his hero fulfill his final wish. On the other, a man of power, mocking the very institution that represented sacrifice and honor. And in the middle stood Daniel Cole, the unshakable line between chaos and tradition. The congressman suddenly turned to address the crowd. "You all act like this is some holy ground," he said, waving his arms. "But at the end of the day, it's just a tomb. Nobody even knows who's in there." The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, shouts of "show some respect," echoed from the veterans and visitors alike. A woman covered her child's ears. Even the reporters lowered their cameras, realizing they were filming something explosive. Daniel's steps did not falter, but inside, memories of Jimmy's funeral surfaced. The folded flag, the sound of taps, the silent salute. Nobody knows who's in there, Daniel thought. We all do. Every single one of us who served knows exactly who's in there. Security moved closer, whispering into radios. The colonel, watching from the command station, stiffened. Ethan's parents exchanged worried looks. This was supposed to be their son's peaceful moment, not a spectacle. But now, the tension was like a drawn bowstring. And through it all, Ethan's gaze remained locked on Daniel. He whispered, "He's not moving, not even a little." There was admiration in his voice. The congressman took another step closer to the mat, now standing only feet away from Daniel's precise line of march. "What happens if I cross it, huh? Does he tackle me?" He joked loudly. Laughter, nervous and scattered, echoed from a few in his entourage. Daniel turned again. His boots struck like gunshots, his eyes fixed on Richard. The air between them grew electric. This wasn't theater anymore. This was a test. Ethan held his breath. So did everyone else. The silent defiance in Daniel's posture was undeniable. He didn't need to speak. His stillness was the warning. For the first time, Richard's smirk faltered just a bit. He wasn't used to being stared down without words, without fear. But rather than back down, his ego doubled down. He stepped onto the mat's edge. A uniformed officer called out firmly, "Sir, step back immediately." Richard raised his hands mockingly. "All right, don't get your medals twisted." But even as he said it, he leaned closer to Daniel, clearly trying to provoke a reaction. The crowd was on edge. Mothers held their children close. Veterans whispered prayers. Cameras zoomed in. Something was about to give. Ethan whispered to his mum, "He's standing like a wall." Sarah squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, that's what honor looks like." Daniel took another slow, deliberate turn. His steps thundered like a drumbeat of discipline. Inside, his heartbeat was heavy, but his face was carved from stone. He knew the moment was coming. He could feel it, and when that line was crossed, his response wouldn't be personal, it would be ceremonial, disciplined, and unforgettable. The disrespect had reached its boiling point. The crowd's patience was thin, and the congressman's next move would tip everything over the edge, into a moment that the world would soon be watching on millions of screens. The congressman's polished shoe scraped against the edge of the black mat, the sacred line that no one crosses. A ripple went through the crowd, like wind through tall grass. Veterans straightened instinctively, parents whispered warnings to their children, and Ethan clutched his armrest tightly, his small knuckles turning white. Daniel's heel struck down, echoing like a gavel. He pivoted sharply, rifle resting against his shoulder, eyes locking on Richard Helburn with a precision that made even seasoned soldiers uneasy. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Richard looked round, seeing the cameras pointed at him, the crowd's attention fixed entirely on this confrontation. For a man who lived for the spotlight, this was intoxicating. What's he gonna do? Glare me to death, he said mockingly, taking one deliberate step onto the mat. The moment his shoe touched the black surface, everything changed. The Tomb Guards trained for years to maintain flawless ceremony. They don't improvise, they don't waver, but they do have protocols, strict, unwavering responses for breaches of the ceremonial zone, and Daniel knew them by heart. With mechanical precision, Daniel executed a thunderous rifle inspection movement, snapping the M14 from his shoulder, spinning it, and bringing it to his shoulder with a crack so loud it startled the congressman. The motion was so fast, so controlled, that the entire crowd gasped in unison. Daniel's voice followed the first sound he'd made all day, deep, sharp, carrying across the plaza like a military command. It is requested that everyone maintain an absolute silence and respect. The words struck Richard like a slap. Cameras zoomed in, reporters froze, even the birds in the trees seemed to fall silent. Ethan's eyes widened. This was the voice of the Tomb Guard. The one he'd watched on YouTube countless times, now happening right in front of him. Richard tried to laugh it off, but his smirk faltered. He glanced around and realized nobody was laughing with him anymore. He wasn't the center of attention. Daniel was, and not through ego, but through honor. Instead of backing away, Richard made his fatal mistake. He stepped forward again, this time closer, standing mere feet away from Daniel. And then, with a sneer, he reached out his hand, touching the barrel of the guard's rifle, as if testing whether this performance would break. That the crowd erupted in horrified gasps. A veteran shouted, "You don't touch the guard." A mother covered her child's eyes. Ethan's father muttered under his breath, "This idiot." But Daniel didn't flinch. His training took over. In one smooth, lightning-fast motion, Daniel shifted his stance, stepping forward with exact ceremonial form. He rotated the rifle down and away from the congressman's hand, with a practiced snap, his other hand rising into a precise on-guard position, halting Richard in his tracks without laying a single finger on him. The discipline was surgical. No unnecessary movement, no aggression, just the overwhelming force of tradition meeting arrogance. Richard stumbled back a half-step, startled, his face flushed red. Reporters' shutters clicked wildly. The crowd was silent again, not out of fear, but out of awe. Ethan whispered, his voice soft but trembling with excitement. He didn't even blink. Sarah squeezed his hand. "This is what respect looks like, sweetheart." Security moved in fast now. 2 military police officers positioned themselves beside the congressman, firm but professional. One whispered something to him that made his jaw tighten. For the first time, Richard wasn't smirking. His bravado was cracking under the weight of centuries-old tradition standing right in front of him. Daniel, without saying another word, executed a perfect about-face, returning to his line of march as if nothing had happened. His heels struck the mat with the same steady rhythm, his rifle gleaming in the sunlight. To the untrained eye, the ceremony had resumed. But to everyone watching, a line had been drawn, and Daniel had held it. The congressman's entourage tried to usher him back, but Richard, still desperate to regain control, turned to the crowd. "This is ridiculous," he barked. He pointed a gun at me. The Marine veteran stepped forward. "No, son." He defended the honor of the tomb. "You disrespected it." The crowd applauded softly, not like at a sports game, but like a church congregation acknowledging something sacred. The sound grew, spreading through the crowd until it was undeniable. Richard looked around, realizing he had lost them. He tried to speak again, but no one was listening. The cameras had captured everything: his disrespect, Daniel's discipline, the precise moment when arrogance shattered against honor. Meanwhile, Ethan's eyes shimmered with tears. He wasn't crying from sadness, but from pride. He whispered, "He's a real hero, Mum." Sarah nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes, sweetheart, He is. The colonel overseeing the ceremony remained at a distance, but his expression softened. He didn't need to intervene. Daniel had handled it exactly as tradition dictated, flawlessly, with dignity. Later, this footage would be reviewed, praised, and archived. But right now, it was simply a moment that no one present would ever forget. As the congressman was quietly escorted away by security, a hush fell once again over the plaza. Daniel resumed his 21 steps, pivoting, pausing, pivoting again. It was as if nothing had happened, but to the hundreds gathered, everything had changed. They had witnessed a rare event, the moment when a living symbol stood firm, not through violence, not through shouting, but through unbreakable discipline. Ethan leaned forward in his wheelchair, eyes locked on Daniel's every movement. His breathing was shallow, but he whispered to his dad, "He's like a wall. Nothing breaks him." Mark's voice trembled. "Remember this, son. This is strength that doesn't need to yell." For the rest of the ceremony, not a single sound disturbed the plaza. No murmurs, no shuffling feet, just the echo of Daniel's boots and the quiet hum of Ethan's oxygen tank. Two sounds, one of eternal tradition, one of fragile life, perfectly in sync. This was the turning point. What began as a special wish for a dying boy had now become something far bigger. A confrontation between ego and reverence, recorded by dozens of cameras, witnessed by hundreds, soon to be seen by millions. And through it all, Daniel never once broke character. He didn't need to. Honor spoke for him. The Congressman Richard Halburn was now a figure of embarrassment, flanked by security officers and quietly escorted away. Cameras captured every frame, the arrogance, the misstep, the moment discipline triumphed over chaos. Social media notifications were already buzzing. Someone had uploaded clips of the encounter within minutes. The crowd remained still. Daniel Cole's boots continued their precise cadence on the black mat, echoing a rhythm older than anyone present could remember. To the untrained eye, the ceremony had resumed normally, but to those who had witnessed the confrontation, this was the aftermath of a hero standing unbroken. Ethan's eyes were fixed on the guard. He had watched countless videos of the Tomb Guards online, but nothing compared to this real-life display of courage and honor. A smile spread across his face, small, tentative, but full of awe. His father, Mark, whispered, "Son, that's what real strength looks like." Ethan nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I want to be like him someday." Meanwhile, reporters and bystanders began sharing the footage. The narrative was clear. A powerful figure had attempted to undermine tradition and was met with calm, uncompromising authority. The story quickly spread across news channels, social media, and military forums. Headlines appeared almost instantly. Tomb Guard stands firm against arrogant congressman. Internet in awe. Discipline over chaos. Soldiers' silent defiance goes viral. A dying child witnesses true honor at Arlington. The viral wave didn't just celebrate the confrontation, it celebrated the values the guards embody: respect, tradition, and the courage to remain unshaken in the face of disrespect. After the disturbance, Daniel returned fully to his post, rifle gleaming, boots striking the mat with unwavering precision. There was no showmanship, no triumphal gesture, just pure, silent duty. This was what made the moment unforgettable. Ethan leaned closer in his wheelchair, whispering to his mother. He didn't even smile. "And yet, I feel like he's smiling at me." Sarah squeezed his hand, tears welling in her eyes. "He's honoring you, Ethan. Every step, every pivot. It's for you." Colonel Peterson, standing a short distance away, finally approached the family. His expression softened as he knelt beside Ethan's wheelchair. "Son," he said, voice low and steady, "you've witnessed something very rare. These men and women dedicate their lives to a duty that most will never understand. Today you saw it up close." Ethan's eyes glimmered with pride. "I saw it, sir, and it's amazing." Mark's voice shook. "Thank you. Thank you for allowing him to see this, for letting him have this moment." The colonel gave a solemn nod. "It's not just a moment, sir. It's a reminder, even the smallest among us can witness, and be touched by, the weight of honor." Nearby, Daniel subtly adjusted his stance. He caught sight of Ethan's beaming face. For a fleeting second, almost imperceptible, the corners of his mouth curved. It wasn't a smile for himself, not for applause, not for recognition. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the boy whose final wish had been fulfilled, whose heart had been lifted by a gesture of perfect discipline. Ethan leaned forward, whispering one word that carried more weight than any speech: "Hero." Daniel's eyes flickered down to a small dog tag tucked beneath his uniform, a tribute to Jimmy, his fallen friend. He touched it lightly, feeling the cold metal, feeling the weight of promises kept. That silent moment mirrored the boy's whispered admiration. 2 lives, connected through respect, sacrifice, and memory. The media frenzy grew. Social networks were flooded with clips and comments. Absolute respect, absolute honor. This is what leadership looks like. I cried watching a 9-year-old witness the best of humanity. The congressman became a secondary story, a cautionary tale of arrogance meeting tradition. Headlines continued to spotlight Daniel Cole and the Tomb Guards, not for confrontation, but for the lesson of stillness, courage, and respect they imparted. Ethan's family, overwhelmed by the attention yet rooted in gratitude, quietly absorbed the moment. For them, the viral fame was secondary. What mattered was the experience, the memory of a final wish granted in the most dignified, awe-inspiring way possible. By the time the ceremony concluded, the plaza had regained its solemn calm. Daniel executed his final pivot, the rifle resting perfectly on his shoulder, boots striking the mat one last time. The crowd moved, hushed, and reverent, broke into soft applause. A tribute not to spectacle, but to honor. Ethan's voice, small but determined, carried across the space. "Thank you," he whispered. Daniel, without turning, gave the slightest nod, a gesture so subtle, yet monumental. It was acknowledgement, respect, and completion, all in one. For the boy, the family, and the spectators, this wasn't just a ceremony. It was a life lesson written in motion. A reminder that true heroism isn't loud, it's disciplined, unwavering, and sometimes silent. As the Wells family prepared to leave, cameras continued to roll, capturing Daniel's steady form against the backdrop of Arlington. Social media feeds were alive with awestruck reactions, and Ethan's story, the story of a dying child, witnessing the embodiment of honor, was destined to inspire millions. This moment, born of a small boy's final wish, had become more than a wish fulfilled. It was a testament to the values that shape humanity: courage, discipline, and the quiet power of standing firm when it matters most. The ceremony concluded, but the weight of the day lingered. The Arlington Plaza, still bathed in soft afternoon sunlight, seemed to hum with the echoes of discipline, courage, and a boy's final wish fulfilled. Ethan, his small frame, exhausted yet radiant, remained in his wheelchair, absorbing every detail: the steady boots, the gleaming rifle, the unwavering guard who had turned a simple meeting into something unforgettable. Colonel Peterson approached the family once more. He knelt beside Ethan, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Son," he said quietly, "what you witnessed today isn't just ceremony, it's a legacy, a reminder that honor and discipline outlast arrogance and chaos. Remember this day, because it will stay with you forever." Ethan looked up at the colonel, eyes shimmering with awe. I think I understand. It's like being brave without having to fight, right?" The colonel smiled softly. "Exactly, Ethan, exactly." Nearby, Daniel Cole returned to his post one final time. His movements were precise, but inside, a rare moment of reflection settled over him. He reached into his uniform and lightly touched a dog tag tucked beneath his chest. The one he carried for Jimmy, the memory of his fallen friend and the weight of duty intertwined. For Daniel, today wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about viral fame or applause. It was about honoring a promise, upholding a tradition, and showing a child one last time what unwavering courage looks like. He allowed himself a fleeting thought. Jimmy would have liked this. Ethan's parents, Mark and Sarah, watched their son in silence. For weeks, the hospital walls had been their world: monitors, medications, and whispered reassurances. But today, outside of those walls, their son had witnessed something larger than life. A display of humanity and honor that would remain etched in their hearts forever. Mark bent down to Ethan's ear. "You saw it, buddy. You saw real heroes today." Ethan nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Yes, and I want to be like them." Sarah wrapped her arms around both of them. "You already are, sweetheart. You already are." The plaza slowly emptied as visitors departed, but the impact of the day reverberated far beyond Arlington. Social media posts were still going viral, hashtags trending, and news segments highlighting the quiet power of the Tomb Guards. People shared stories of discipline, courage, and respect. Inspired by the encounter, Daniel watched from his post, the hum of cameras and whispers fading into the background. He reflected on the contrast of moments: arrogance versus honor, chaos versus stillness. A single phrase echoed in his mind: stillness is strength, and he understood it in a way he never had before. Later, as the family prepared to leave, Ethan whispered a final word to Daniel, small but clear: "Hero." Daniel's eyes flickered toward the boy. In the strict world of ceremony and tradition, he rarely allowed emotion to show. But for that fleeting moment, the corners of his mouth curved ever so slightly. Not for recognition, not for praise, but because a boy had seen the embodiment of honor, and it had touched him in a way words could not express. The dog tag beneath Daniel's uniform caught the sun, glinting like a silent witness to a promise kept, a memory honored, and a legacy strengthened. He touched it again lightly. Jimmy, the fallen, and every unknown soldier who had given everything, all woven into the moment. Ethan's parents rolled him gently toward the exit. The boy's face was glowing, the exhaustion of illness softened by the profound impact of what he had witnessed. For Mark and Sarah, this day would forever remain a beacon of hope, courage, and humanity. The sun dipped lower over the horizon, casting long shadows across the black mat. Daniel remained for a few final moments, boots planted firmly, rifle resting at his side. The plaza was empty now, but the essence of the day lingered in the air: discipline, honor, courage, and the transformative power of a single act of respect. Even as Ethan and his parents left Arlington behind, the echoes of the Tomb Guards' unwavering presence followed them, a reminder that true heroism does not shout. It stands silent, steady, and eternal. And in that quiet, the family felt something extraordinary, a child's final wish fulfilled, and a life touched by the purest form of human dignity. Asterisk. As the sun finally dipped behind Arlington's white marble, the plaza grew quiet. The ceremonial echoes of boots, rifles, and disciplined pivots faded, leaving behind a stillness that carried weight far beyond words. Ethan's final wish had been fulfilled. A boy facing the fragility of life had witnessed courage in its purest form. He had seen discipline confront chaos, honor withstand arrogance, and tradition shine brighter than the fleeting glare of ego. And in that moment he had understood something profound. True strength is often silent. Daniel Cole returned to his post one last time that day, rifle in hand, posture impeccable. Yet inside, he reflected on the lessons carved into every step, every pivot. Honor is not applause, courage is not reaction, and discipline, above all, is the quiet, unyielding force that can transform lives in ways the world may never see. Ethan's parents, hearts full, slowly wheeled their son toward the exit. They knew this day would remain etched in memory forever, a story of bravery, respect, and the transformative power of simple human decency. The videos had already begun to spread online, clips of Daniel standing firm, of the congressman being humbled by unwavering honor, were being shared, watched, and celebrated by millions. But for those who had been there in person, the lesson was deeper than virality. Stillness is strength, respect is sacred, and small acts of courage can ripple through the lives of countless others. As the Wells family disappeared from view, Daniel adjusted his rifle and surveyed the plaza one last time. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the quiet dignity of generations past. Somewhere beyond the crowd and the cameras, the boy's whispered word lingered: hero. And in that whisper, Daniel and everyone who had witnessed the day understood the profound truth that would linger far longer than any news cycle. Tradition is not weakness, stillness is strength, and honor is timeless. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to see the power of courage and respect, and subscribe to honor the legacy of true heroes.